Never assume your favorite horror game series will end just because the story seems near its final chapter. Recent news about Poppy Playtime might flip everything you thought you knew. Today I want to share some official clues about the future of Poppy Playtime. Many thought Chapter 5 would be the end, but new information suggests there could be a Chapter 6. We'll look at hints from the developers themselves, including comments from their CEO on Discord, and talk about what this all means for the series. Whether you're excited for more chapters or worried the story might drag on, you'll want to hear every detail. The main question facing the Poppy Playtime community is simple. Is Chapter 5 really going to be the last installment, or will the game keep going into Chapter 6 and beyond? For months, fans assumed each new chapter was building up to a grand finale. After all, Chapter 5 will supposedly take place in the labs deep within the factory, which is where the prototype lives. That sounds like the perfect showdown spot, but official messages from the development team hint that the story might not wrap up there. This creates a challenge for people who want a definitive ending soon. Some fans love the idea of extra chapters, while others worry about the plot getting stretched too thin. There's also confusion because an ex-director, known as Isaac, wrote a story plan for the entire saga, yet we don't know if the devs will follow that script or make big changes. With all these unknowns, the community is split between excitement for more content and concern about the game, possibly losing focus. If you're here to find out what's official, what's rumored, and what the developers themselves have said, you're in the right place. We'll go over each piece of evidence, from Discord chat logs to older statements made in January 2024. By the end, you'll have a clearer picture of where Poppy Playtime might be headed. On the official Mob Entertainment Discord server, Zach has made several comments about the future of Poppy Playtime. Recently, he mentioned that each game gets better and that Chapter 5 will be even better than the previous releases. He also said they learn a lot each time they launch a new chapter. In one specific message, he referenced the number of chapters they've created so far. He wrote that Mob has only made 4 chapters to date, using the word only, which seems to imply that 4 chapters is not the grand total they intend to produce. This is important because if they plan to end the series at Chapter 5, he might have said something like, "We've made 4 chapters and now we're capping it off with the 5th. Instead, he hinted that 4 is still a small number. Before Chapter 3 was even released, Zach apparently mentioned Chapter 5 and Chapter 6 in a conversation. The details are a bit fuzzy, but it's clear that the idea of a 6th chapter has floated around for at least a year. Even back then, the devs weren't entirely sure of their final plan, since the number 6 was written in quotes, suggesting it wasn't locked in stone. This lines up with the more recent statement about having only 4 chapters made so far. If they were sure about stopping after 5, it would be odd to keep referencing a possible 6th. Another piece of the puzzle is the ex-director known as Isaac, who left Mob Entertainment in March 2024. Before leaving, he mentioned on social media that he finished writing the story all the way up to a final chapter. We don't know if his plan will be used in full, changed partially, or thrown out. The devs might keep the core ideas he wrote, or they might take a different path. The big takeaway is that a final arc is supposedly mapped out, but we have no clue how many chapters it covers if the studio decides to expand or shrink it. Why Chapter 5 seems like an ending. The biggest reason so many players believe Chapter 5 could be the final story is that the devs have said it takes place in the lab, the deepest area of the factory. It's where the prototype is believed to live. Meeting the prototype face to face feels like the ultimate boss encounter. In many games, going into the heart of the operation for a final fight suggests the story is reaching its peak. If we defeat or expose the prototype in Chapter 5, that sounds like a natural conclusion to a horror saga that started with Huggy Wuggy in Chapter 1. So a lot of people have been preparing themselves for a big finale. Why people think a Chapter 6 could exist. The direct developer messages about only 4 chapters being done so far strongly hint that 5 isn't the end. The mention of Chapter 6 as early as January 2024 also supports the idea that they have more story to tell. There's also the possibility that the devs found the game's popularity strong enough to keep it going. Poppy Playtime is no small title. It's gotten a lot of attention, merchandise, and spin-offs like Project Playtime. If the community remains engaged, the developers might see Chapter 6, or even beyond, as a smart move. Even if we face the prototype in Chapter 5, there are many subplots that could extend the story. For instance, what happens to characters like Poppy, Huggy Wuggy, Mommy Longlegs, if she somehow returns in a different form? Or new villains introduced along the way. We might defeat the prototype but discover a bigger conspiracy behind the factory. The Bigger Bodies initiative alone leaves a lot of room for more experiments we haven't encountered. The entire facility has so many hidden areas that each new chapter could reveal another wing, like the labs, test chambers, or maybe even an off-site location. The lore about the original founder of Playtime Co., Elliot Ludwig, might also continue. If the devs want, they could dig deeper into his personal experiments or any research partners he had. That storyline could span multiple chapters, especially if each bigger body was part of a bigger puzzle. What about the final chapter? Possibly being a separate game? Another angle is that after Chapter 5 or 6, Mob Entertainment might move on to a new title entirely, set in the same universe. Some fans speculate that after finishing the main storyline, the devs could create a Poppy Playtime 2. This would allow them to keep the brand alive, but also reset the chapter numbering. If that happens, Chapter 6 could be the real final for the current storyline, but they might spin off future tales under a different name, focusing on different characters or a new location. Chapter 1 introduced Huggy Wuggy, a giant toy monster with a terrifying grin. Chapter 2 gave us Mommy Longlegs and deeper secrets about how children's minds might be inside these living toys. Chapter 3 and 4 continued to expand the factory's story, introducing more living toys and more hints about a big master plan. By the time we reach Chapter 5, the stakes are high, and we're heading into the labs. The mention of the labs is crucial because it's the place where the darkest experiments are likely performed. We've heard about the prototype controlling or influencing everything down below. If we confront it there, it feels like a final face-off. But we have to remember that final face-off is not always the end in horror games. Sometimes you think you've won, only for a new threat to appear. Could the prototype survive after Chapter 5? If the prototype is some kind of advanced machine or entity, it could easily find a way to back up its mind or escape at the last second. That would allow it to remain a threat in Chapter 6. Maybe you destroy one part of it, only to learn it transferred its consciousness into another network or a new toy. Alternatively, Chapter 5 could end with the prototype being defeated, but the final tape or cutscene might reveal an even older or more powerful experiment waking up. That would lay the groundwork for a 6th chapter without the prototype. Sometimes game studios mention an intended number of chapters, but later revise it based on fan feedback, internal budgeting, or creative inspiration. The mention that the devs learn a lot with each release suggests they adapt as they go. If they see a storyline angle they love, they might expand the series. The success of each chapter also influences how many more they create. If Chapter 5 sells well or gets positive reviews, that might motivate them to push into Chapter 6. If they had originally planned to end at 5, but realized the fan base wants more, they could change that plan. The phrase "Mob has only made 4 chapter games so far" implies an ongoing pattern. They might be building a track record, 4 chapters for Poppy Playtime, plus the possibility of more. They also have Project Playtime, which is not a chapter-based story but a multiplayer spin-off. The CEO's wording might be subtle marketing. By calling it only 4, they create a sense that the saga is far from over. This tactic keeps fans engaged, fueling theories about how big the final storyline might become. If we look at other indie horror hits, it's not unusual for them to continue beyond what was first announced, especially if the fan response is strong. Five Nights at Freddy's is a classic example, originally pitched as a one-off game and then expanding into multiple sequels, books, and eventually a movie. Poppy Playtime could follow a similar path if it remains popular. Also, the devs might realize they can release new chapters at a steady pace, earning revenue and keeping the brand alive. If they ended at Chapter 5 without telling all the potential stories, they might miss out on the hype. Online, the community is split. Some can't wait for more chapters, excited to see how the devs expand the lore. Others fear the series might become repetitive or that the tension might drop if we keep playing chapter after chapter. They worry about sequel fatigue, where each new release feels less special. However, many fans are glad to see the devs confirm that they're not stopping at 4 or 5. The general mood is curiosity about how they'll keep the story fresh, if they manage to introduce new characters and new areas. Effectively, fans might stay thrilled for Chapter 6. What Chapter 5 might offer. Let's consider what we already expect from Chapter 5. A deeper look at the labs, a big confrontation with the prototype, and possibly huge reveals about how the factory's darkest experiments began. We might learn more about the orphans who were used in these experiments, or see a final push by Poppy to escape the factory. Since it's set in the labs, Chapter 5 could also unveil brand new, bigger body toys, or we might see half-finished creatures that never got out of their test chambers. The devs said each game or chapter gets better, so maybe we'll see improved puzzles, more advanced AI for enemies, or bigger cinematic moments. The potential for a cliffhanger. Another strong sign that Chapter 5 might not be the end is the possibility of a cliffhanger ending. Horror games often do this to keep fans guessing. You might defeat the prototype only to discover you're stuck in the factory with something worse. Or you might escape the labs but realize a new monster is on the loose, setting the stage for Chapter 6. How a Chapter 6 could stand out. If Chapter 5 is all about the labs, Chapter 6 might shift the location again. Perhaps we'd explore a hidden branch of the factory or an entirely different facility owned by Playtime Co. The devs could also move the story outside, showing us what happens if these living toys break free into the nearby town or city. Another angle is the story of Elliot Ludwig, the possible involvement of other founders, or the background of how these experiments got government funding. The devs have teased so many secrets that there's room to expand for at least one more chapter. Is there a chance of more than 6 chapters? While the talk so far mostly focuses on up to Chapter 6, it's not impossible that the series could extend beyond that if the demand stays high. However, the devs might worry about overstaying their welcome. They could wrap up the main storyline by Chapter 6 and then consider a new game in the same universe, starting fresh. Because Isaac claimed to have written the entire story, we might see a blueprint for how the game ends. But since he left in March 2024, there's a question of how much of his plan the current team will keep. If they liked his vision for 6 chapters, they might follow it. If they disagree with some parts, they might shorten or lengthen the saga. Also, if his plan included certain twists or a final confrontation in Chapter 6, we might get major changes if the devs decide to introduce new characters or pivot the storyline. What about the release schedule? Another factor is time. Each chapter has taken the devs months to produce. Chapter 5 might come out sometime next year, and if they do confirm a Chapter 6, we could be looking at a timeline that stretches well into the future. That's good news for fans who love the series, but it might also test everyone's patience if it takes too long. The devs have said they learn a lot each time they release a chapter. By Chapter 4, they improved certain mechanics and also tested new story ideas. If Chapter 5 is bigger, more polished, and more cinematic, fans might be more willing to wait for a potential Chapter 6, hoping it maintains that quality. From all these clues, it seems unlikely that Chapter 5 will be the grand finale. While it might feel like a climax in some ways, the door is wide open for a Chapter 6. The developer's wording about only 4 chapters, so far, is a strong sign that 5 is not the stopping point. The presence of the ex-director's story plan also hints that a multi-chapter arc is still on the table, unless the devs drastically change course. The puzzle is whether the community will embrace more chapters, or start to feel like the series should have ended sooner. At the end of the day, the devs at Mob Entertainment will decide how far the main storyline goes. They might release a final confrontation in Chapter 5, then a new threat in Chapter 6, or something entirely different. The only thing we know for sure is that the people behind Poppy Playtime aren't ready to say goodbye just yet. So what's the biggest turning point in all this? Probably the official mention that Mob has only made 4 chapter games so far, coupled with the earlier statement about Chapter 5 and possibly Chapter 6. That's where the community realized the story might extend further than they guessed. Instead of building hype for a last stand, the devs might just be setting the stage for another big reveal. This is the moment that made many fans go back and re-examine the entire series. They started asking, will I actually be done with the factory after Chapter 5, or is that just another step on a longer path? The game's creative team seems to enjoy surprising fans, so a new chapter beyond the labs is not impossible. That single dev comment shifted the tone from "we're nearing the end" to "we might only be halfway through." The next chapter of Poppy Playtime, Chapter 5, might not be the final entry. Multiple hints from the CEO and earlier messages suggest that a Chapter 6 could very well be in the works. The ex-director wrote a full storyline, but it's unclear how closely the current dev team will follow it. We know we're heading into the deepest part of the factory for what feels like a major confrontation with the prototype, yet the official statements point to a future beyond Chapter 5. Fans can expect the series to keep evolving. Each chapter so far has introduced new enemies, deeper lore, and bigger puzzles. Chapter 5 will probably raise the stakes, but that doesn't guarantee a complete end. We could see the prototype survive, discover a more powerful experiment, or uncover a whole new branch of the factory leading into Chapter 6. The strong community response keeps fueling more theories, and the devs seem open to continuing as long as the interest remains high. The real question is how they'll balance the need for closure with the desire to keep the series going. Too many chapters can wear people out, but a well-planned storyline across multiple releases can keep fans excited. For now, we can only watch for official updates, reread the devs' cryptic messages, and wait to see if Chapter 5 brings a final showdown or a new beginning. Given the current evidence, it's safe to say Poppy Playtime's journey is far from over. Subscribe for more.